want to say welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another panel on our Bookathon. My name is Melissa Brayden. I will be moderating this particular panel, which is called Elements of the Unknown. And I have a fantastic slate of panelists who are here to talk to you all about creating tension and plotting suspense and deploying something that can be incredibly infuriating called the cliffhanger. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we get into it. I'm a romance writer and an avid reader of the genres of these authors, and I feel like I have a lot to learn. So I have come armed with questions, but I want to jump into this. And I first want to meet our panelists. And rather than me reading a bio for each one, I told them, hey, I'm just going to toss it to you and you tell us who you are and what you write. And then we'll get started with some discussion. And I'm going to start with Allie.
Hi, I'm Vali. I write, I guess, mysteries, romantic intrigue, paranormal, romance, a little bit of each. I'm a little split personality. So that's me.
Oh, tell us what your current release is.
The latest release was Turbulent Waves, which is the sequel to Beneath the Waves about Atlantis. And then in May, I have a new one. It's kind of hard to describe. It's kind of like a funny romance, but not really, called Writer's Block.
All right.
That's not funny.
Not funny.
All right, Carsen, you're up next.
I'm Carsen Taite, and I write primarily romantic intrigue, but I also write traditional contemporary romance. And my Trial by Fire, which see this blurred outline this blurred thing doesn't work so great, but Trial by Fire
We can see glimpses. We can see glimpses.
It's very mysterious.
Witness protection.
Exactly. Need to alter my voice. The first book in the Courting Danger series. It's a set of 3 books that are set in the same world of the Dallas County Courthouse, and it was out in October. And I have another romantic intrigue, Perilous Obsession, which is a standalone, and it is out in February. I won't show you a picture because you can't see it anyway.
It sounds perilous, but actually your background and your blurring of the book works perfectly for our panel because it's called Elements of the Unknown. So exactly. I like that you have introduced some mystery already into our discussion. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Melissa.
All right, we're moving on to Sophia.
I'm Sophia Calhagan. This is, look, you can actually see it. Look at that. My most recent one, Not All a Dream. I write speculative fiction, of which this is the first standalone. The first 3 are all related. I'm not sure if you call it a series or not, but it's all the same protagonist. Yeah, survival stories and love stories kind of mixed together, but not romance, not really.
Okay, but love story mixed in, which means you might not get that happily ever after. We won't. I don't know. I'm not spoiling anything, but you never know when you hear love story. I worry.
By happily ever after.
I worry a little bit when I hear that, but we'll see. And we'll leave it to the readers to find out. All right, next I'm going to toss it to Lee.
Oh, so I'm Lee Patton. I was kind of caught up in what Sophia was saying, so sorry, I caught up short here.
No, it's okay.
Anyhow, I tend to write in two different genres, I guess. I write sort of contemporary mainstream fiction with an element of gay romance thrown into it, but it's usually not the most prominent element. And I've written 3 mysteries now, which really surprises me because I never thought about myself as a mystery writer. I wrote 2 back in the 2000s for the late great publisher Allison Books, and which was killed off by the 2008 recession. And so they're languishing, what would you call it, with a dead publisher. So, and then the most recent one I've written was obviously for Bold Strokes Books, Fresh Grave and Grand Canyon. It has the same young protagonist as the other 2 books, Ray O'Brien. And he's an amateur sleuth. He's just one of those people who seems to show up when there's some kind of a murder going on, and he's a drama teacher, and he's very ill-equipped to solve these murders, yet he tries. And in this case,
Right.
he's
like
joined a
drama
small
teachers.
group. He's joined a small group of volunteers in the Grand Canyon, which is closed to the public for their research project. Several miles into their adventure, one of their crew is found dead, and he seems to be bludgeoned to death. And the only possibility is that someone else in their group has done it.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. All right. We gotta figure out who. Well, the drama teacher at the Grand Canyon will do this for us, hopefully. But we'll have to pick up the book, everybody, and find out. Next, I'm going to move on to Sander.
All right. After Santiago, I've written books with bold strokes. The second is One Verse Multi. It is science with love, and is exciting. And if you've ever been a grad, you might have a good time. And my first with bold strokes is a romance. So
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, Radclyffe.
I write contemporary romance, romantic intrigue, paranormal romance, and on occasion erotica. My most recent is Pathway to Love, which is number 7 in the River series. And the one before that was Unrivaled, which I think are the two which are in the sale. And this is the middle of the trilogy, which is the second half of the Quinn and Honor series, more or less. They're all standalones, but they're related. And that's it. That's me.
All right, Quinn and Honor are a favorite of mine, so I'm excited to hear that as well. And Brad, I'll stick with you for our first question, and then after that, guys, I'll move it around. Audience, once again, if you have questions, drop it in the Q&A, and I'll kind of keep my eye on that box. If not, I'm going to run with my curiosity. So I'm going to ask, first of all, what is your favorite tool for creating tension and suspense in your writing, if you have a favorite, hopefully?
Well, in your email, you said I could only have one.
That's right. I'm limiting you because
I thought cruel and unusual. But one that works well for me in almost every genre is secrets. Particularly in a romance, I think it works really well when one character has something in their past or in their present that they are trying not to reveal to the other character or even to the readers at times. So secrets is my answer.
All right, I think we're going to I want to delve into that a little bit more as we continue to talk, but I like that answer very much. I'm going to move to Sophia next. What's your favorite tool?
Damned if I know. Honest to God, I think what happens to me is I write in layers, and a lot of times I'm in pursuit of a character and just evolving that character. And I find that I rely heavily, I guess my secret tool, my favorite tool is the editing process itself. When I find myself literally rearranging parts like it's Legos, and I finally figure out how to build the tension and the suspense that I want. But initially I give away way too much, way too early. Everything's out of order. It's a jumbled mess. And which is why I don't submit stuff till it's really done and polished, because otherwise I'll destroy the editors. They won't be able to cope. So that, I think, is probably the answer.
All right, so you're a first drafter in the most pure sense, and then lots of rearranging to work on
29th
that
drafter,
tension.
all of it.
Yeah. Makes sense. I'm going to move the question on to Sander now.
So One Verse Multi has a lot of cliffhangers. At least I aimed for cliffhangers at the end of most of the chapters. But if I know we're going to get into detail about that, but if not that, I tried to raise the stakes slowly and just sort of make the problem like increasingly worse, and in sort of a global warming kind of way, but not global warming, but in the same sort of slow, what is happening? Are we going to die sort of energy? So
Turn up the heat on the stove. I love it. Yeah.
yeah.
What about you, Lee? Lee, what
I
about you?
have to go with the cliffhanger too. I'm sorry to say, I know that it's coming
That's all
out
right.
as a topic, but
No, I want your honest answer.
I just think that it just seems like it's obvious and a entertaining way. When I'm reading, I enjoy, and even when watching, I enjoy cliffhangers a great deal. Always gets my heart pumping a little faster. And I guess my twist on it is just I like almost always to end a scene or a full chapter with that sense of the unknown that's coming, that cut that just kind of leaves you hanging literally. That's my favorite technique.
Right, it's a good one. I can't argue with that. Carsen.
I like to drop a body. I like to kill someone. I was hoping you would call
Stolen
me
my
before
answer.
Vali.
Oh, my answer.
Good score.
and that's just kind of a umbrella for I like to just insert some event, just unexpected something.
Something to make our jaw drop on the floor, which has
Exactly.
happened many times. And lastly, Allie, what's your favorite tool for creating suspense and tension?
I'm gonna have to go with fear.
Yeah.
We'll take it.
I truly love some of my favorite books to write were actually the two mysteries, which were in the Calling series. And as fun as those books were to write, like I said, I usually try to pick a topic that I'm really interested in, and Santeria, just because I'm Cuban and know some people that believe some weird shit. But I researched that because I've heard of it, but I didn't know that much about it. But as fun as it was writing those books, makes me sound a little psychotic, but creating that serial killer, actually the two serial killers in both those books, was the best part of it. I mean, it's like when you have someone who could be that cruel, that could be, and it's the fear that kind of permeates the book. And then I remember sending it to my beta readers, especially the first one, and they thought they had figured it out in the first chapter. Because I did drop, some Easter eggs in there. And then it's at the very end, they said I never saw it coming. But so I would say fear embodies, and you kind of murder, I guess.
Right.
Murdering mayhem.
Couple of murderers in our midst. All right.
Yeah.
Invite us for dinner.
All right. All right. So a couple of you have already alluded to something that many readers have a love-hate with, which is the cliffhanger. But it does seem to be a calling card of many of the genres that you write. We've come to kind of expect it as part of the storytelling journey, even though sometimes it can just keep you up really, really late at night when you have to get up early. But I want to ask you, what is your philosophy when working with a good old-fashioned cliffhanger? I mean, is that something that you will fully embrace? Do you pepper your novels with it all over the place, or is it something you really try to use sparingly? So I'm going to go to Carsen first on this.
It depends. I think using a big plot cliffhanger, I think I use it sparingly because I think, and within the book, like I don't do a plot cliffhanger from book to book in a series, because I just think, it might be months before the next book comes out, and I wouldn't appreciate that at the end of a book. I have done a kind of a relationship cliffhanger in a series, because the relationship arced over several books. And so I did that, but I resolved the underlying plot, but then you just didn't know if will they, won't they, till the next book. But I think anything you can use to keep the reader turning the page is important, but you don't want to stress the reader out too much, that they just get frustrated during the process. So it's a balance, definitely.
Yeah, it sounds like a tall order as well. I don't envy you guys juggling all that. I'm going to go to Lee next.
I don't really object, as I said before, I don't object to cliffhangers so much as long as I think they've got to seem to arise naturally out of the characters' motivations and the needs of the plot in a way that doesn't seem hokey, like tying Pauline up on the tracks and waiting for the train to come, something like that. It's got to be more natural than that, and it's
Okay.
Kind of going back to what Allie was saying about fears. It often grows out of the fear within the character themselves. I think that's the best kind of cliffhanger for me.
All right. I think that's valid and make it feel authentic as well. Now, Allie, I know for a fact you employ cliffhangers because someone once recommended the Devil series to me, and I read book 1 without knowing it was a series. And I got to the end of that thing, and I said to the room full of people, I'm sure there was an expletive involved, but I had to wait. Luckily, you had written a couple more books, but I had to wait days for them to arrive. I'm still not over my anger, but talk to me about cliffhangers and how you feel about them.
Yeah, and I guess you could leave it at a cliffhanger. It just depends on how thick your skin is when you start to get mail. I turned it in as an 800-page book, so blame Rad that she decided not to do that. So yes, I did write that, and thank God the second one came out, I think like maybe 4 or 5 months later. So you had to wait, but hopefully not that long. But
well, it worked. I bought it.
Yeah, no, that one was tough because it was just not. I did it in that one, and then I got a really nasty email from somebody else because the end of Blue Skies. And I also left as a cliffhanger, and that actually took me about 2 years to write the sequel to that. So yes, no, it's you do. I didn't mean to do it. Well, I guess obviously, yes, I didn't mean to do it, but it's just and it's going to be a series. Like I said, really in the Devil series, I only really planned for 2 books. I didn't plan for any more than that. But it's a tough thing to do, but sometimes it's necessary just to, because usually, especially in the Devil series, they take part, like, you end on one day and the next book starts right kind of at the same day and continues. But in this case, you can do it. It works. I mean, thank God people came back to the Devil series, and it's, Kane was been very, very good to me, but
I think it's doing all right. I think it's doing okay.
Yeah, but it's like I said, in some cases it's necessary because you can't, like I said, I actually wrote that as one story, and then we cut it in half, and that's just where it had to end, and then it went on from there.
Well, we all thank you very much. We lived. Moving next. So Sophia, what about you and cliffhangers? What's your take?
I'm not sure that my books really have, well, I think within the book, there are cliffhangers. There are, oh shit, now what? And so you turn the page and it continues, and you hopefully get some kind of answer. But for the end of the book, my first book, which was Whatever Gods May Be, I was like you, Allie. I turned in, it wasn't 800 pages, but it was way too long. And a little bit more point of view numbers than I ended up with. I have written now 4 novels for Bold Strokes, and they have all featured just one point of view. And the end of the first one, the protagonist is being urged to do something, and the last person we hear from in the story is the person urging her to do that, and we don't hear her answer. It just stops. Trust me,
Yeah.
And then I came along, but I write very slowly, so all those people who were wondering how she answered, I thought I left it so that anybody who sort of thought about it knew what she was going to do. And in fact, that's what she did. And 3 or 4 or whatever it was years later, you get to find that out, because that's how long it takes me to do a book. After that, the other books are, not really cliffhangers. I like the idea of writing survival stories in which people survive because there's love in their lives. not just self-love, because you can write a survival story with just literally one person in it. And those stories, if there's love, that's going to be about self-love. But other than that, it's about the other people and who they encounter, and how
Yeah.
the love
That's a great point.
enables them to survive, heals them in some cases.
Mhm.
And I wanted the ending of those books to make that very clear. Even in this last one, where it's not at all clear what she's actually doing there, you can interpret that in at least 2 or 3 different ways that I'm aware of, and there are probably more than that. But it really is about making sure that that's a message. And so that's
Great.
where my endings go.
Great. I appreciate that answer very much. Rad, like Allie, I happily have suffered through cliffhangers of yours. So I would love to hear your take on it.
Gee, I was just going to say I don't write any.
You do, Rad.
I think if you're writing a series, then cliffhangers are often really a good tool, as Allie was saying.
And
And
yes, that's what I've experienced with you.
and you want to be sure that you're going to have the next one come along at a reasonable time, because readers do forget. That's sometimes a problem. And sometimes readers are really aggravated, but if they know that the next one's coming, it gets to be an auto buy. It gets to be a pre-order when they see the title. So I think that if you're planning a series and you're going to end on a cliffhanger, or even if you're not going to end on a cliffhanger, you have to have some regular pacing. Within my non-paranormals, I will end chapters, I hope, with questions. I always want there to be something at the end of the chapter that draws the reader to the next page.
Yep.
And it may simply be, what did she decide? Or the decision she just made is really a terrible decision. And now what's going to happen? So for me, those are the emotional cliffhangers, which I try to use liberally when writing a romance. But when I'm writing a paranormal, it's like, oh my God, poof, she just disappeared into the dark hole in the sky. And I think that's genre related.
Yeah, for sure. And lastly, I'm going to you next, Sander.
So for When vs. Multi, it does not end on a cliffhanger. I'll give you that. It resolves. So, because I don't think I could stomach it personally. My anxiety would be too high. I am the first one to. I'll read a series. I have to wait for it to end, and I'll read it all through, so I don't have to worry about cliffhangers. But each chapter, I've read several horror and paranormal and mysteries, and I really enjoyed the page turner of a cliffhanger at the end of chapters. And so When vs. Multi has that. And I guess, like Rad said, ending on a question. But usually I would end the chapter like right before that answer, and then you have to go to the next chapter to get the answer to the question. And so it like, as they're discovering information and you come up to the end of that chapter, like the chapter before is like, what does this information even mean? Where do we get the answer? And then you hit the part, like the chapter end, and it's like, I know exactly where to find the answer. And then next chapter is them going to find it. So inside the book, there are cliffhangers, but it resolves. So, the whole book.
Gotcha. Smaller cliffhangers, if you will. That makes sense. I'm going to go to an audience question, and it's someone who's interested in whether or not there's an author out there, I guess whether it's your genre or not, that you emulate or respect. And this might be a great way also to get an author to check out that maybe someone hasn't read before. So I'll go to Carsen. Do you have somebody that an author that you read or grew up reading before you wrote, anything like that?
Like 40 of them. I mean, I really enjoyed Sarah Paretsky's V.I. Wachowski series, J.M. Redmond's Mickey Knight series, Sue Grafton, may she rest in peace, Kinsey Mahone series. I really like the way they were able to keep us interested in the character and their growth and development throughout like you got to see that play out while seeing concrete mysteries in each book. And that was fun for me because you get a complete story, but then if you read the whole series, you get a really great package, and it's a gift.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think it's interesting. We're talking about all these tools and your personal style and approach to writing, but I'm sure these authors that you're mentioning had an influence on that to a certain extent. And if you were just hearing those authors' names come up and you miss them, don't forget that you can check out this recording online later. I think we'll have it on Facebook for you. Lee, do you have an author you could mention that's influenced your work?
This question always throws me because it was like Carsen just said, I could name 400.
Yeah.
But as far as zeroing in on influences that were like seminal for me, I would go like way back to when, I started reading gay fiction like Felice Picano, those kind of novels, the Dancer from the Dance, kind of Andrew Holleran, all those gay classics were, when I was young, they weren't classics yet. They were the beginnings of gay literature. And I just had the privilege of reading them when I was really young, and it was all really fresh and it was all really exciting.
Very cool.
And then, thank you, Melissa. I just draw a blank, but I mean,
that's okay. You gave us a great name right there.
So many great writers out there that I wish I could pay tribute to.
We appreciate the answer. Rad.
I'll come up with two. One from truly my formative reading years would be Daphne Du Maurier. I think probably the Gothic romances have filtered into everything I've written. I mean, I think that they're formative in how I develop my main characters. And Unrivaled is actually my sort of testament to Du Maurier's Rebecca. I really like that storyline. Yeah. And I don't know if anybody's ever recognized it in here, but that's what it is. And I would say Sarah Aldridge, who is the first lesbian romance, which wasn't even called a romance at the time, that was published by Naiad Press in 1973. And Aldridge went on to write 13 novels over probably 20 something years. And she wrote her first one when she was 68 and had retired from law school. So she's kind of a hero.
Wow.
And, I think that if you're interested in reading the history of lesbian romance fiction, that's the place to start.
All right. You heard it here, everybody. Allie, do you have a name or two?
I do. I guess in my books, one of the themes, I guess, that runs through it is kind of like, it's, even if it's romantic intrigue or whatever, it's the family kind of saga. So that's actually my all-time favorite book is Mario Puzo's The Godfather. And that one, obviously, it's something I was interested in. So I kind of did my own special take on that. But also, I mentioned this one the other day, it's Anne Rice. Anne Rice was, to me, kind of the queen of description. She was very, very good at it. And one of my favorite books of hers is The Witching Hour, which is about 800 pages long. It creeps you out to, read it but it's like 12 generations of one family in one book. And it was just really kind of fascinating the way that she laid it out. And it's, I had mentioned the other day, I said, I live right outside of New Orleans, and I never realized that the sky here is violet. It's not, and I read that in a book. I walked outside and was like, well, I'll be damned. Yes, that is right. So she was, when you read something like that, it's not that you want to copy her style, but that you hope to get as good as, to bring the reader into a book by just the description of places. And obviously you could tell that she had a very intimate relationship with the city, just because, and that's what I want since most of my books take place in New Orleans, that you would come here and be able to walk through the places, because even though I changed the names, the places are all real.
Yeah, very cool. Appreciate that. And Sander, do you have an author you can mention?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of my I feel like I bounce around genres a lot. I'll at least start a book in any genre. But I feel like Toni Morrison definitely not
Yeah.
only influenced like my reading as a person, but also my writing. I read a book by about her writing style and writing technique, and she spoke a lot about just writing for yourself as an audience, and what people like you engage with people like you all the time, and what people like you, how you feel, how you think, how you take in the world, and then like translating that. So I really enjoyed, I think about her a lot when I sit down to write. I'm like, Toni would tell you to get a pen and paper. Allie, I'm looking at you. I can't.
Like Allie, yeah.
But she would tell you. And then and for better or worse, I feel like the most popular name I read is Stephen King, but I feel like that's because in like an Alley Valley way, he writes a lot about Colorado, where I'm from, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I've been to that hotel, you know, the one, and I've been to Boulder, and so I feel like I just like following him around my state. So I enjoyed that a lot.
Awesome. We mentioned pen and paper because Allie writes longhand on her drafts first, which is mind blowing. All right, Sophia, do you have a name for us?
I have, I'm like Carsen and Lee. Mine are in the hundreds. I ended up I almost became an English major just because it was like a book club. And you could read all this great stuff. And so the list for me is long. Mark Twain, Kurt Vonnegut, Stephen Crane, because of the remarkable job he did. I mentioned it the other day with Red Badge of Courage, but more recently, Ursula Le Guin and probably Margaret Atwood are major influences.
Yeah.
Also, I have to say something about The Color Purple. That book, I read that whole book, and when I was done, I thought, is this real? I went back and looked at all the bookplate stuff to figure out if it was fiction or not. I, honest to God, didn't know. I read the whole, it was brilliant. So those are my, I mean, there's a lot more influences, but those are really
Sure, yeah.
right up there.
No, thank you for those. And how great is it to come here and have some fantastic book recommendations when I walk away. So thank you guys for that, and thank you, audience, for the question. I'm gonna just move us forward, and because we don't have a ton of time, I'm just gonna jump ahead a little bit in my questions to one that I'm a fan of, and I'm gonna go to Sander first on this one, because the ticking clock, oh my gosh, is often my undoing when reading one of these books. And I'm always very aware of it, and I'm like shouting at the characters to hurry up, and we have to, get out of there before the place explodes or whatever might happen. So I want to know, what is your personal approach to pacing? Do you use time or the ticking clock to stress me out on purpose, Sander?
Yes. So one of the last chapters of One Verse Multi actually has a literal ticking clock. Martin has about 3 minutes to make some choices and get off the ship, if you will. So yes, I'm a fan. I like the ticking clock, but I also like to have that sort of messed with. And so I think the extent of a problem can be as immediate or as like distant as it needs to be to get the story across. And so bigger world problems that I think we deal with all the time sort of have like this, in 50 years we'll be out of stuff, or we'll be out of space. And so that's a ticking clock, right? But it's who has an idea of what 50 years is like 50 years from now?
Less stressful than 3 minutes.
Yeah. But you would think, right? Or at least you would hope people would sort of rally before then. So I believe in like really slow ticking clocks, but like you talk about it a lot, so it feels a little bit more urgent. And then I'm absolutely for a total ticking clock. And I think it allows you to have time for story and time for character development when you need it, but then you also have the device of moving things forward quickly. So I only have so many minutes to get this done. So it can give you both space to talk about things. Yeah.
Yes, gotcha. Allie.
Oh, I'm a total fan. I usually just back into pacing. I don't really never really plan for anything. But in some cases it's, yeah, I like to use it if you in one of the devil books, Emma gets kidnapped, and then so it really is a very fast moving ticking clock, because if she doesn't get there, bad things are going to happen. So and then you end the chat. So it was all those things. It was like the ticking clock, the chapter ending on a question, cliffhanger,
Yep.
kind of thing, to move to the next thing. At least I did, bring it to a conclusion in that one book. I didn't keep you waiting.
We'll
But
take that.
I think in some cases it does. It's like it's a great way to move your plot along, to keep, like Rad said, the reader engaged, because you really care about these characters and you want to know exactly what's going to happen to them. So, and especially if one of them is, and in this case she was pregnant, so you definitely want nothing bad to happen to that. So
You can't be trusted.
All right, Rad, we'll go to you next. What's your take on the ticking clock and pacing and how to manage it?
I use it a lot for the climactic scene in an intrigue, especially in the honor series. When I have everybody's going out on an action, or they're all converging on a point, and this is where the dramatic highlight is going to be, then I will use timestamps literally to show where they are and how they're moving and how much time is passing, so that you create a sense of urgency for the reader as they read it. So I will use it to orient them as to where the characters are, and then use that to sort of drive the story forward. So I think they're very effective for me in that regard. Otherwise, in all the contemporary romances I write, pacing is emotional. So I don't worry about it too much.
And you mentioned the honor series, and for me, there was a lot of suspense, and pacing was a big part of it. So yeah, completely. If you haven't read that one, guys, pick up the honor series for sure. Carsen.
I'm a fan of the ticking clock. And a lot of times I'll write those parts and then back in to slow things down a little bit. Because if I'm writing it, I want to get to it, and so I'll write and then I'll go back in and fill to kind of slow it down, so that because you need that push and pull. Otherwise it's just blah, it's kind of like in a TV show where you've got, like, I'm just thinking of the 100. So you have, like, I don't know if you've seen that, but you have like these kids and they've been drop shipped down to the ground to see if Earth is safe. And the adults are back up on the ship, and on the ground, things are like moving at hectic, crazy pace. And on the ship, they would just like, here's what's happening on the ground. And then let's slow it down a little bit and go back to the ship, back to the ground. And it just, it keeps you engaged. It keeps you watching, but it also, you don't feel like you're, what's happening? You get a good sense of the push and pull, and you can feel it, and you have some time to feel it, rather than it's just happening.
Well, and then as a reader, that gives me a chance to catch my breath for a second before you do it to me again, and and then we're off for another suspenseful journey. So yes, that makes sense, the push and the pull as well. Lee, I'm going to come to you next and talk to you about the ticking clock and pacing.
Yeah, it's really interesting that when you mentioned it in your question in advance, it wasn't so much a thing to me. I don't know what that says about my writing, but in my latest novel, the Grand Canyon book, I realized that it's kind of like the river is the clock, because on this rafting trip, you have to go down the river. And especially when there's this urgency over this sudden murder, everything is just either you're talking about rapids, you're talking about flat water, but that river is moving. And it's interesting considering what Carsen just said about having to vary things, because that, you know, I would kind of have to gasp for air during those flat water sessions to maybe have the characters exchange something to humanize them, to give a little more background. It would be about like my chance to get away from this constant imperative of going down the river and trying to get to the end of the story, and also to develop what little there is, what little there can be of the budding romance that's going on in the midst of all this, this crazy jazz.
Exactly.
Well, and
yeah.
it sounds a little bit like what Carsen said earlier about it's a balancing act. So for this too, of making sure the elements are there, but represented for what they should be. Lastly, Sophia, I'll go to you and your answer for the pacing question.
I also did time stamping. I did it in the first book, where it was just one thing after another. It was, and people have talked to me about how just very fast paced that book was. The third book, I did it also, and in fact more religiously there than in any other book, and that had almost the opposite issue, in that here's a character who's stuck in a box, literally stuck in a box. She doesn't know where she is, when she is, how long she's going to be there, what's going on, and the story begins with her figuring out that maybe she can just call this day one. She gets this little thing that enables her to start tracking time. So the whole book is built around this ability to track time. And when she finally, at the end of the book, stops needing to use this particular little device to track time, the book ends.
Yeah.
And what I was able to do with it is use these periods where, okay, now she's going to, we have a 10-year gap between the second book and the third one. And we use the time she's there, like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my mind. Oh my God, what day is it? And she starts, I use dreams and memories to kind of fill in those 10 years and then move the thing along later. So, yeah. And then in the third book, it happens with the growth of the cold, the kind of, it descends and then it gets worse. And then they start to understand that even when things ease up a little bit, winter is going to come again, and it'll be worse than the last one. And it's going to get worse for the next 5 years before it can get better. And their realization of this, and how long does it take to grow a crop of vegetables? And how soon do we have to get this in the ground? And how much time do we need for the concrete foundation to cure before we can even build the rest of the greenhouse over it? And that sort of thing. So yeah, timing is a big deal.
It was key, it sounds like, in your storytelling over all the books. We are 5 minutes from the end. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine two questions. I see we have an audience question from Renee that is similar to one that I have. So I'm going to just do a compromise there. You know, I write romance, and so there's the ability to make it up as I go a little bit more, pants it. But for you all, sometimes your plots are a lot more complicated and intricate. And so I wonder about your process as you move forward. Do you have to plot everything out in advance so that you make sure everything is checks and balances, or is there a little wiggle room? I guess I'm kind of asking about your process, and that is also what Renee is asking: is do you know the end of the book before you start writing, or at what point do you know? So I'm sure each of your answers is individual. So I'll go with Rad first.
I've written 3 very different kinds of books. I wrote the Justice series, which is a police procedural, which is the one that I had to plot the most because it was the most oriented towards discovery, of finding clues. I mean, basically investigation. The Honor series is an intrigue series. And with that, I know the major scenes. I know the major points that I want to happen. I know basically there's always usually a villain or something or someone who is putting the main characters in danger. So I have to know who they are and what those scenes are. And when I write romances, I also know pretty much the key emotional scenes that will happen, but how they'll happen and when they'll happen, I don't know. And that's true for all the books. It's a totally dynamic process as I write.
Okay, so it has to do a little bit with genre, and there's some wiggle room a little bit more on romance. Carsen, what would you say?
No.
There will be no plotting.
I mean, I would love to, and I've said this on earlier panels today, but I would love to be able to plot it all out in advance. But a lot of times I discover how I want it to go as I'm writing it, which is very messy, and I don't enjoy, that part of the process, but I also don't enjoy outlining. So I think I'm just outlining as I go. It's like I was the
Okay.
kid who would write my paper and then the teacher would be like, I wanted an outline. I'm like, okay, well, I'll just go back to the paper and make an outline out of it,
Take the outline from it. Yeah.
So
Sounds good. And I don't want to rush the rest of you. We just have a couple of minutes. So I'm going to ask you to be succinct. Allie, what about you in terms of your plotting?
Yeah, no, that's one thing Carsen and I have in common. You would think, especially in the Devil series, when you have a lot of moving parts. But I find that if you, I don't know, I outline by writing a 1-sentence description of every chapter. And in some cases, if I have an idea, I'll move ahead and write a 1-sentence, like this is what needs to happen in this chapter.
This is what's going to happen.
Yeah. But as far as like outline, anything like that, no. Yeah.
I'm amazed. I'm amazed by that. Lee, quickly, what's your process in terms of plotting? Do you plot in advance?
Yes, and just to
Yeah.
be succinct as I can, yes. And I like outlines, and I feel like I can depart from them anytime I want to.
That's a good point. There's a versatility there. You're not married to it. I love it.
Right.
Sander, plotting?
No, I'm definitely a pantser. I
Oh my
usually start in
gosh,
the middle.
okay.
Sometimes I start at the end, or I'll start like when there's kissing, and then I'm like, what's the plot here? So not
I love it. I love it. I was not expecting these answers. I have to be honest, because now I'm even more in awe of this. And lastly, Sophia.
I don't plot. I have an idea. It usually involves a character and a place and and a verb of some sort, an event, or a circumstance that drives stuff, and I'll just go from there. And a lot of it comes together and finally makes some sense in the editing process. The multiple rounds of editing.
Perfect.
Root and branch.
Perfect. And that leaves us exactly timed to our 50-minute panel. And I had more questions, but I feel like I've learned a lot and I was surprised by a lot of answers. So I walk away feeling enriched and want to thank my panelists so much for your insight and sharing so much of what it is that you do on a daily basis with us. And I want to thank the audience as well. Have a great night, everybody. What a fantastic
Melissa.
discussion.
Thank you,
Thank
Melissa.
you, everyone.